Good morning, everyone. The topic that I will be presenting today would be sensor fusion using selective sensors to achieve a decision and to achieve task execution. The main idea behind this presentation is to introduce a speech-based human-machine interface, a sensor management system which is smart enough to use selective sensors during the fusion process. The fusion methodology that is used is the Dempster-Shafer theory of evidence. Introduced the concept of a sensor map and a task map, and a help phase or an assist phase to bring the system to normal operation. The front end of the system is a speech processing block. As you can see, it's a speech input. This is an example of a high-level task planning wherein you have a big task, and then the speech string decomposer will take this big task and then decompose it into smaller or level 2 task modules. And the output is actually a command sequence of subcommands. The sensor map is a concept which is actually similar to that of a sensory brain map, wherein similar to the sensory brain map which holds information about the sensors in our body. The sensor map will hold a slot for each of the sensors that are attached to the system. Now, the sensor slot is basically it could be of n variable tuple, wherein it can have the entity that it's measuring, the observation, the vector of observation values, the uncertainty, its position with respect to the vehicle, and so on. Sensor manager is actually a module which actually controls or manages the sensor map. The job of the sensor manager is to update the usage statistics of the sensor. It removes sensors. There is a heuristic, it could be a time or an application-based heuristic by which the sensors can be updated in your sensor map. And then you can, if a sensor is not used, depending upon the heuristic, you can actually reassign the slot for another actively used sensor. Sensor selection is a process wherein we actually have to group sensors. The grouping sensors is basically similar to, like, for a particular task, you have only certain sensors used for the fusion process. The sensor selection actually prioritizes those particular sensors before it actually does the fusion. It does a priority assignment which is very similar to weight assignment to your sensors, like giving more weightage to a non-faulty sensor, for example, over a faulty sensor. So it's basically to actually assign weights to different sensors in your system. The task map is again a similar structure like your sensor map, which is a dynamic structure, which consists of a set of subtasks. We have a task, and as I said, it gets decomposed into subtasks, right? So you have a mapping structure, which is actually provided in the task map. There's the task manager, which is also a controller for the task map, which again updates the usage of a particular task. This is again similar to the concept of a sensory brain map, wherein a particular task, when it is not used for, depending upon a certain heuristic, it can actually be used or reassigned to the adjacent task or the other task in the system. So that is what the task-based reassignment is. When it can also be trained to add new tasks into your system, and that is when you have the add new tasks as another process, and delete tasks, it is depending upon the heuristic. So whenever a new task is trained or taught into the system, you can actually map it into the sensor manager will actually map it into the existing list of sensory tasks, and then it will do the corresponding reassignment. This is the overall decision model. As you can see, we spoke about the sensor inputs. The user input, other than the speech command, is actually like an a priori information. Now, if you think of this like a fusion cell, the fusion cell can consist of 3 different sources of information. One is your sensor information. The second one is actually the auxiliary information, that is information from other nodes in your system. And the other one is the external knowledge. So the user input here is like an external knowledge. Like, you can provide any information that further enhances the confidence of the fusion algorithm, like a map of the environment or any other extra variables that you know that can actually help the fusion process. In technical terms, the sensor inputs are termed as the hard data set, which has the real information from the sensors, and the user input or the external knowledge is termed as the soft data set. So the fusion process actually uses both this information to improve the confidence result. The constraints is necessary in order to make sure that your decisions are in par with the physical limitations of the vehicle. It could include any physical, like depending upon the kinematics of the vehicle, or it could have other constraints or temporal constraints depending upon the application. And action is finally the thing that you want to actually do. The assist phase is actually a concept wherein instead of a vehicle being an autonomous vehicle just navigating around a room, picking up objects, it's like suppose if it encounters a situation wherein it finds another obstacle which is very different, it has to communicate back with the user. It's like a two-way communication phase. It helps the, like for example, it encounters an object which is very different. So it can actually communicate to the user by either calling the user or by taking a picture and sending it to him and then waiting for a response from the user. It's basically like a two-way communication. This is an example of a collaborative control, and you could have different help numbers or different severity levels for each of these situations. Like for example, if the time exceeded, it can query to the user saying the time is exceeded for a task. Like if you have an obstacle, you can again query to the user and ask, okay, should I just abort the operation or what do I do? So, and this is like a collaborative control example. So we've seen like a sensor management system which uses the sensor map and the task map in order to achieve the fusion process by using only selective sensors, and an assist phase which is an example of a collaborative control to communicate with the user as a two-way communication protocol. So this is the purpose of the presentation. Yeah, that's it. And these are the references for what I've been talking about. So, yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Where do you think this kind of an algorithm and implementation will be really useful?
The purpose of this, like you can see, it's a Dempster-Schaffer method which is actually used. It's very useful in human-robot interaction or a decision-making process because you need the reason. You can say is like the Dempster-Schaffer method, for example, is used to handle uncertain situations, wherein in an interactive phase of the interactive applications.
Like automatically driving vehicles.
Automatically driving vehicles, or like a robot which is actually navigating an environment, looking for a particular object, and then it can again, when it's not able to decide, then it can again go into an uncertain phase, because the Dempster-Schaffer will actually handle for even uncertain situations. And it's more efficient because it handles the mass probabilities only when there is evidence present supporting that particular event. So, yeah.
A good example might be, let's say I have an all-terrain vehicle, and I'm right now automating an all-terrain vehicle that will drive on its own. And the sensors on it will detect that there is a big ravine right there. And this all-terrain vehicle is going alongside a human. So it's running in the woods and a human's walking within the woods. And it will stop and say, my sensors tell me I can't drive down that ravine and get back up. I'm stuck. What do I do? The human, being the higher level decision maker, would look one way down the ravine, look another way down the ravine, and oh, he sees that way down the ravine, there's a bridge over there. And so the human would direct the robot, come this way, and there's a bridge. And so that's the type of man-machine interaction or human collaboration that we're looking at. Any other questions?
Yeah.
What all sensors are you using?
This is basic, and like it actually, whatever sensors you're using, it will actually go into the sensor map. It's kind of an application-independent framework. This is just a framework. So you can actually customize it depending upon your application. It's a framework, yeah.
You're not like developed.
No, this is just a framework. Like whatever sensors you're using, you can actually put it into your sensor map.
Right. And what inputs have you taken? Sensor map? Like while checking whether the algorithm is correct?
When the algorithm
Well, a good example would be, it may be for, again, going back to our application of the all-terrain vehicle, it will have a video camera and LiDAR.
Right.
And those would be the two in there. I don't care about ultrasound because, you know, I don't think that's good enough, and I don't care about altimeter because I don't really need it, and maybe I don't really care about temperature. But, you know, those last three sensors that I mentioned, even though they could be used by the framework, they would be turned off from the framework because the important ones right now are video and LiDAR. And so what he's creating is a framework that decides, all right, which sensors will I fuse that data together to do my activity? basically turning on and off different sensors that may be available.
How do you actually try to implement this tool?
I think this. I'm thinking of using the speech for the speech processor. It will be like a MATLAB application, but for the demonstration can be implemented using the high-level languages. For the map, you can have a separate files like data file, which can actually have those information, and then you can actually extract or read those files and update those files based on your high-level programs.
So I'll wrap this up by saying. Loud enough so the microphone can hear me too. So, one of the things I said before this is that Bala will be looking for people that can help with the implementation. We had a good question here. What sensor do you use? Well, we'll be looking for people who will implement sensors such that they could be used by the framework, and people who will implement actuators who could be used by the framework. And maybe even somebody who is interested in speech input and storage, or maybe speech processing, or some other aspects, or putting things like MATLAB on an ARM-based processor. All sorts of little projects that could be done that will support Bala, because he's coming up with a framework, and that's the research aspect of it. The implementation, which is kind of nice to do, so you can prove to the PhD faculty members that it can be done, would be something that master's students could work on as well. All right, sound good? With that, thank you very much.